The rain outside was coming down hard, turning the Los Angeles streets into slick, reflective ribbons of neon light. Inside the small bistro, the world felt warmer, wrapped in the smell of roasted garlic and fresh bread. It was a Tuesday evening, which usually meant a slow trickle of regulars, but tonight the weather had driven people indoors, seeking hot soup and coffee. Jenny adjusted the strap of her apron, wincing slightly as it dug into her shoulder. She had been on her feet for 6 hours already, and the dull ache in her lower back had become a constant companion, a reminder of the double shift she had picked up. She wasn't complaining, though. She couldn't afford to. Every hour on the clock was an hour closer to paying the electric bill, and more importantly, an hour closer to the tuition deposit her younger brother, Tommy, needed for his summer art program. She wiped down a table near the window, her eyes glazing over as she watched a bus splashing through a puddle. Tommy had been so excited when the acceptance letter came in the mail 3 days ago. He had run into the kitchen, waving the paper like a victory flag. It was a prestigious program, the kind of thing that could launch a career. But the deposit was due by Friday, and looking at her bank account felt like staring into an empty well. She had calculated the math 100 times, hoping the numbers would somehow change, but they remained stubbornly the same. They were short, not by a little, but by a lot. "Jenny, order up!" The cook, Benny, yelled from the pass-through window, his voice cutting through the low hum of chatter and jazz music. "Coming," she called back, snapping out of her daze. She forced a smile onto her face. That was part of the job. You checked your problems at the kitchen door, or at least you tried to hide them deep in your pocket where the customers couldn't see. She moved quickly, navigating the tight spaces between tables with practiced ease. She delivered a plate of pasta to a couple on a first date, refilled water glasses for a family celebrating a birthday, and tried to ignore the way her feet throbbed inside her worn-out sneakers. She was good at this job. She was efficient, she remembered orders, and she knew how to make people feel welcome. But tonight, the weight on her shoulders felt heavier than usual. As she returned to the counter to pour another pot of coffee, the little bell above the front door chimed. It was a cheerful sound, but it made Jenny sigh internally. Another customer meant another table, another round of pleasantries, and more time on her feet. She turned toward the door, pasting on her professional smile. A gust of wet, cool air swept into the restaurant as the door swung open. A man stepped inside, shaking off a black umbrella. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans, his hair slightly damp from the drizzle. He kept his head down for a moment, scanning the room with a quiet, observant gaze. Jenny grabbed a menu, ready to greet him, but something made her pause. There was a familiarity to the way he moved. It wasn't the loud, demanding energy of a typical customer. It was calm, grounded. He looked up, and the light from the overhead lamp caught his face. Jenny felt her breath hitch in her throat. She knew that face. Everyone knew that face. It was the kind of face that had been on movie posters for decades. The sharp jawline, the dark eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken stories, the slight furrow in the brow that suggested he was thinking about something far away. It was Keanu Reeves. For a split second, Jenny didn't know what to do. She had served actors before. This was Los Angeles, after all. Usually they came in with entourages, loud and demanding the best table in the house. But he was alone. He looked remarkably normal, just a man trying to get out of the rain and find a warm meal. She took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her apron. Treat him like a human being, she told herself. He's just a person who wants dinner. "Good evening," she said, walking up to him. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "Table for one?" He looked at her, and his face softened into a genuine, polite smile. "Yes, please. Just somewhere quiet is fine." His voice was low and gentle, lacking any hint of celebrity arrogance. He didn't flash a charming movie star grin. He just looked tired but kind. "Right this way," said Jenny, leading him past the louder tables near the bar to a small two-top in the corner.
It was her favorite spot in the restaurant, away from the draft of the door and the clatter of the kitchen. It offered a view of the room, but allowed for privacy. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" she asked, setting the laminated card down in front of him. "Just a black coffee for now, thank you." He slid into the chair. He didn't pull out a phone immediately. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching him. He simply sat there, hands folded on the table, looking at the menu with serious focus. Jenny nodded and turned away, heading back to the coffee station. As she poured the dark roast into a ceramic mug, she watched him in the reflection of the glass pot. He looked sad, or perhaps just weary. It was a heavy kind of weariness that Jenny recognized. It was the look of someone who had seen too much of the world, someone carrying a load that didn't show on the outside. She felt a sudden pang of empathy. Here was a man who had fame, fortune, and the admiration of millions, yet he sat alone in a corner booth on a rainy Tuesday night. It made her own problems feel somehow smaller, or at least different. Money couldn't buy peace of mind, and it couldn't erase the past. She placed the coffee cup on a saucer and carried it back to his table. "Here you go," she said softly. "Thank you." He looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. They were dark and deep, filled with a quiet intensity. "I appreciate it." "Do you need a few more minutes?" she asked. "I think I know what I want. The steak sandwich, medium rare, with the fries." "Excellent choice," Jenny said, scribbling the order on her notepad. "I'll get that started for you." She walked away to give the ticket to Benny in the kitchen. As she passed the window, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection. She looked tired. Her eyes were a little red from lack of sleep, and her hair was frizzy from the humidity. She thought about Tommy waiting at home, counting on her to make magic happen with a waitress's salary. She thought about the acceptance letter sitting on their kitchen counter, the paper already starting to wrinkle from the damp air in their apartment. By 9 p.m., the restaurant was nearly empty. The kitchen had closed and Benny had gone home, leaving Jenny to finish the closing duties. Keanu finished his last bite of sandwich and pushed his plate slightly to the side. He took a sip of his coffee, which surely had gone cold by now, and looked out the window. Jenny knew it was time to close up. The manager had left her the keys, trusting her to lock up. But she didn't have the heart to rush him out. He seemed to be finding a rare moment of peace, and she understood how valuable those moments were. She walked over to his table, hesitating for just a fraction of a second. "How was everything tonight?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned his gaze back to her. "It was perfect," he said, and he meant it. There was a sincerity in his voice that touched her. "Thank you." Jenny hesitated. She felt an urge to say something else, something more than the standard script of a waitress. She saw a kindness in his eyes that invited honesty, but she held back. She was just a waitress, and he was a movie star. There were lines that shouldn't be crossed. "I'm glad," she said simply. "Take your time. No rush." She walked back to the counter to tally the receipts, but her mind was racing. The clock was ticking. The tuition deadline was getting closer with every passing second. She felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her again, cold and familiar. She looked at the man in the corner, a person who had faced his own tragedies and come out the other side, and she wondered if he ever felt as helpless as she did right now. She didn't know it yet, but the night was far from over, and the silence in the restaurant was about to be broken by a whisper that would change everything.
The clock on the wall above the kitchen pass seemed to be moving slower than usual. It was that strange time of night, past the dinner rush but before the last call, where the restaurant felt like a ship drifting in calm waters. The noise level had dropped, leaving only the clinking of cutlery and the low murmur of the few remaining customers. Jenny stood behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine. Her feet throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain that shot up her calves, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the tuition letter on the kitchen table at home. She was thinking about the look on Tommy's face when he realized they might not be able to afford the program. That look was worse than any yelling. It was a quiet acceptance that life wasn't fair, and it broke her heart. She glanced over at the corner table. Keanu Reeves was still there. He had finished his steak sandwich and was now nursing a cup of tea. He hadn't touched his phone. He hadn't pulled out a laptop. He was just sitting there, occasionally looking out the window at the rain, occasionally scribbling in a small leather notebook he had pulled from his jacket pocket. It was odd. Most people who came in alone were desperate for distraction. They scrolled through social media, they answered emails, they watched videos. They did everything they could to avoid being alone with their thoughts. But he seemed comfortable in the silence. He seemed to be resting in it. A group of 3 young women at a table near the door kept whispering and glancing in his direction. They were giggling, taking sneaky photos with their phones. Ginny felt a protective instinct rise up in her. She knew that look. It was the look of people treating a human being like a tourist attraction. She walked over to their table with the check, placing it down with a firm but polite smile. "I'll take that whenever you're ready, ladies. The kitchen is closing in 10 minutes. "Oh, sure," one of them said, barely looking at Ginny, her eyes fixed on the corner. "Do you think he would take a picture with us?" Ginny kept her smile fixed. "He's just having a meal," she said softly. "I think he'd like to finish his tea in peace." The girls pouted but didn't argue. They paid quickly and left, casting one last longing look at the man in the corner before stepping out into the wet night. The door swung shut, and the silence returned. Now it was just Ginny, the cook in the back washing dishes, and Keanu. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He turned a page in his notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up suddenly, catching her eye. He didn't look annoyed that she was staring. He just offered a small nod. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you, and you see me." Ginny felt a flush of embarrassment. She quickly looked down at the rag in her hand. She grabbed the coffee pot, more out of habit than necessity, and walked over to his table. His cup was still half full, but she needed something to do. "Can I warm that up for you?" she asked. He looked up, his eyes clear and focused. "No, thank you, I'm good. But maybe I could trouble you for a glass of water?" "Of course," she said. She turned to the station behind her and poured a tall glass of ice water. When she placed it on his table, she noticed the notebook. He had covered the page with sketches, rough lines and shapes that looked like motorcycles and cityscapes. "You draw," she said, the words slipping before she could stop them. He looked down at the notebook and smiled, a self-deprecating, humble smile. "I doodle, it's not really drawing. My brother, he's the real artist." Ginny stiffened slightly at the word. Brother, artist. It hit too close to home. She gripped the edge of her apron. "My brother draws too," she said, her voice a little quieter than before. "He's actually quite good. Better than good. He got into this summer intensive program at the Art Institute." Keanu looked up, his full attention snapping to her face. The casual small talk evaporated. He had a way of listening that was intense but not intimidating. It was like he was tuning into a specific frequency. "That's a big deal. That's a prestigious program." "It is," Ginny said. She felt a lump form in her throat. She shouldn't be burdening a customer with this. It wasn't professional. But the rain was beating against the glass, and it was late, and he looked like someone who would understand. He worked so hard for it. He's only 17. He has this raw talent, you know. He sees things differently. "Artists do that," Keanu said gently. "They show us what we're too busy to see." Ginny nodded, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. She looked away, pretending to check the sugar packets on the next table. "Yeah, well, he might not get to go." She hadn't meant to say it. The admission hung in the air between them. It felt heavy, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Keanu didn't offer a platitude. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm sure it will work out," or "Where there's a will, there's a way." He didn't insult her with false optimism. "Why?" he asked simply. His voice was low, devoid of judgment. "Money," Ginny said, the word tasting bitter. "It comes down to that, doesn't it? The deposit is due Friday. I've been picking up extra shifts, but..." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely around the empty restaurant. "Life is expensive, and art feels like a luxury we can't afford right now." She let out a short, dry laugh. "I'm sorry, you don't want to hear about my problems. You came here for a quiet dinner." Keanu shook his head slowly. He closed his notebook, keeping his finger on the page to mark his place. "Don't apologize. It's hard. It's really hard to watch someone you love have to fight for something that should be celebrated." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. "You know, I've been doing this, acting, making movies for a long time, and people see the success. They see the red carpets. They don't see the times I was sleeping on a friend's couch, or the times I didn't know if the movie was going to get made, or the times I lost people I loved." He looked back at her. His eyes were sad, but there was a strength in them, a resilience that had been forged in fire. "The world can be very heavy, but your brother, he has you." Ginny felt a tear slip down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand, mortified. "I'm trying to be enough for him," she whispered. "I just don't want him to lose that spark. He's so young. If he loses it now, I don't know if he'll ever get it back." "He won't lose it," Keanu said with a quiet certainty. "Not if he has a sister who fights for him. That matters more than the money. The belief matters." Ginny took a deep, shaky breath. It was the most honest conversation she had had in months, and strangely, it wasn't awkward. It felt like talking to an old friend in the middle of a storm. The fact that he was famous, that he was Keanu Reeves, faded into the background. Right now, he was just a man who understood pain, sitting across from a woman who was tired. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadying.
Sometimes we just need to say it out loud. At that moment, the kitchen door swung open and the cook, Benny, poked his head out. "Jenny, I'm heading out. You good to lock up?" Jenny jumped, the spell breaking slightly. "Yeah, Benny, I'm good. See you tomorrow." Benny gave a nod to Keanu, a respectful tip of his cap, and disappeared out the back door. The sound of the heavy metal door closing echoed through the empty room. They were truly alone now. The restaurant was closed. Technically, she should have been asking him to leave so she could finish cleaning, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. The conversation had opened a door, and she wasn't ready to close it yet. Keanu looked at his watch, then back at her. He seemed to realize the lateness of the hour. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. "I should let you get home," he said gently. "It's late." "I'll get your check," she said, moving toward the register. I felt a strange disappointment. The conversation had been a lifeline, and now it was ending. He would pay his bill, walk out into the night, and go back to his world of movie sets and premieres. She would go back to her world of bills and overtime. She printed out the receipt and placed it in the black folder. As she walked it back to her table, her mind was racing. The words he had said, "The belief matters," echoed in her head. He was right, but belief didn't base the deposit. She stood by his table as he looked at the bill. He didn't look at the total. He simply pulled out a few bills and placed them inside the folder without counting them. "Keep the change," he said, sliding the folder toward her. She picked it up. "Thank you. Have a safe trip home." He stood up, pulling his jacket tight around him. He looked at her one last time, his eyes lingering on her face. "Take care of yourself, Ginny, and tell your brother. Tell him to keep drawing, no matter what." "I will," she promised. He turned and walked toward the door. He moved with that same quiet grace he had entered with. As he pushed the door open, the sound of the rain grew louder, filling the silence of the restaurant. She watched him step out onto the sidewalk. He opened his umbrella, the black canopy blooming against the streetlights. He didn't look back. He walked away, disappearing into the gray mist. She stood there for a long moment, holding the black bill folder. The restaurant felt incredibly empty now. The adrenaline of the night, the emotion of the conversation, was fading, leaving her exhausted. She walked over to the table to begin buzzing it. She picked up the glass of water he hadn't finished drinking. She wiped down the table where his notebook had rested. It was just another table, just another customer, just another night. Or so she thought. As she wiped the surface of the table, her rag hit something rough. She looked down. There, tucked halfway under the napkin dispenser, was a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't the receipt. It wasn't an autograph. It was a message. And as she read the words, the silence of the restaurant seemed to press in on her, heavy and thick with the promise of something about to change.
The silence in the restaurant was deafening. The jazz music had stopped playing, or maybe Jenny just couldn't hear it anymore over the pounding of her own heart. She stood there, frozen in the middle of the dining room, clutching the piece of paper she had found under the napkin dispenser. The paper was thick, torn from the small leather notebook he had been scribbling in. She looked down at it, her eyes scanning the messy, hurried handwriting. It wasn't a signature, it wasn't a sketch. It was a note, written in black ink that had started to bleed slightly into the damp paper. "I saw the look in your eyes. I know that weight. Don't let the fire go out. I've left something in the folder. For the art." Jenny read the words 3 times. They didn't make sense at first. Her brain was tired, foggy from the long shift and the emotional conversation. "I've left something in the folder." Her gaze dropped to the black bill folder sitting on the edge of the table. It was the one she had handed him, the one he had slid back toward her with a quiet, "Keep the change." She had assumed he had just left a generous tip on the credit card slip. She hadn't even looked at it yet. She had been too distracted by the piece of paper. With trembling fingers, she reached for the folder. It felt heavier than usual. She picked it up and flipped it open. There was no credit card receipt. Instead, tucked inside the leather sleeve was a thick stack of cash. It wasn't just a few 20s. It was a wad of $100 bills folded in half. Jenny gasped, the sound sharp and loud in the empty room. She pulled the money out, her hands shaking so violently that she nearly dropped it. She began to count. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 50. The stack was thick. She counted it again, sure that she was making a mistake. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. The numbers blurred as tears filled her eyes. She stopped counting at $3,000. There was more in the stack, but she couldn't hold it anymore. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she sank into the chair Keanu had just vacated. The chair was still warm. She stared at the money scattered on the table in front of her. It was more than the tuition deposit. It was enough for the full program. It was enough to pay the electric bill. It was enough to buy groceries for a month. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the way he had done it. He hadn't made a show of it. He hadn't handed it to her and waited for a thank you. He hadn't treated her like a charity case. He had slipped it into the folder,
left a quiet note, and walked out into the rain. He had given her help with dignity. Then a memory flashed in her mind, a sudden sharp realization that made her stomach lurch. She remembered the moment he had stood up to leave. She remembered the hug he had given her, or rather the brief, awkward moment where she had impulsively reached out. Had she done that? No, she had just said goodbye. But wait, Jenny looked down at the note again. I saw the look in your eyes, and then she remembered the napkin. Earlier in the night, when she had been clearing a table near the kitchen, she had scribbled a desperate, angry little note on a napkin. She hadn't given it to him. She had shoved it into her apron pocket. It had been a moment of weakness, a way to vent her frustration. The note in her pocket said, "My brother is an artist. We have no money. I feel like I'm failing him." She had written it just to get the words out of her head, with no intention of ever showing it to anyone. But had she? Had she slipped it to him? She patted her apron pocket frantically. It was empty. She frowned, her mind racing through the timeline of the night. She had refilled his water. She had talked to him about Tommy. She had brought him the check. Had she slipped the napkin into the check folder? She couldn't remember. The night was a blur of exhaustion and anxiety. She looked at the money again. Then she looked at the handwritten note on the table. It didn't matter if she had slipped him the napkin or not. He had heard her. He had listened to the words she spoke about Tommy, and he had seen the pain she was trying to hide. He had responded not with pity, but with action. A sob tore from her throat, raw and unexpected. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stifle the sound, but she was alone. There was no one to hear her. The dam broke, and suddenly she was crying, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the relief. She cried for the exhaustion. She cried for the kindness of a stranger who owed her nothing but gave her everything. For weeks she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had been the strong one, the one who worked double shifts, the one who told Tommy everything would be okay even when she didn't believe it herself. She had been terrified that she was going to let him down. And now, in a matter of seconds, the weight was gone. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. She took a deep, shaky breath and picked up the handwritten note again. She traced the letters with her finger. Don't let the fire go out. It felt like a direct order from the universe. She gathered the money, her hand steady now. She smoothed out the bills and tucked them safely into the deep pocket of her jeans. She wouldn't leave it in the register. She wouldn't leave it in her car. She was keeping it close. She stood up, her legs feeling surprisingly strong. The ache in her back was still there, but it felt distant now, unimportant. She looked around the empty restaurant. It looked different now. The chairs stacked on the tables didn't look like a burden. They looked like a finished task. The rain on the windows didn't look gloomy. It looked like it was washing the slate clean. She walked to the door and locked it, flipping the sign from open to closed. She turned off the lights in the dining room, leaving only the soft glow of the emergency exit sign. The room plunged into darkness. She walked to the back, through the kitchen. She grabbed her coat from the hook. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. It was late, nearly midnight. Tommy would be asleep. She unlocked the back door and stepped out into the alleyway. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, coating everything in a layer of shimmer. The air smelled wet and clean. She walked to her old car, the engine rattling to life on the first try, a small miracle. She pulled out of the alleyway and onto the main road. The streets were empty, the traffic lights flashing yellow in the mist. As she drove, she kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other in her pocket, her fingers brushing the edge of the stack of bills. It felt like a dream. She half expected to wake up and realize she had fallen asleep in the break room. But the paper in her other pocket, the note, felt solid and real. She pulled into the driveway of their small rental house 20 minutes later. The porch light was on, waiting for her. She killed the engine and sat in the dark for a moment, looking at the house. She thought about going inside, waking Tommy up and telling him the news. She imagined his face. She imagined the relief. But she decided to wait until morning. Let him sleep. Let this be the last night he worried about his future. She got out of the car and walked up the steps. The house was quiet when she entered. She kicked off her wet shoes and hung up her coat. She walked into the kitchen. There, on the small wooden table, sat the crumpled acceptance letter from the Art Institute. Next to it was the calculator she had used 100 times to crunch the numbers. Jenny walked over to the table. She pulled the stack of cash out of her pocket. She didn't count it again. She simply placed it on top of the acceptance letter. She smoothed out the bills. Then she took out the handwritten note from Keanu. She placed it on top of the money. She stepped back and looked at the little display. It was a strange altar, an acceptance letter, a stack of cash, and a note from a movie star. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She walked into the living room and saw Tommy sleeping on the couch. He had fallen asleep with his sketchbook on his chest. A pencil had rolled onto the floor. Jenny walked over and gently picked up the sketchbook. She looked at the page he was drawing. It was a sketch of her, standing in the kitchen, cooking dinner. He had captured the tired line of her shoulders, but he had drawn her with a small smile on her face. She put the sketchbook on the coffee table. She covered him with the thin blanket that was draped over the armrest. She stood there for a long time, watching him sleep. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The anxiety that had been her constant companion for months was gone, replaced by a quiet gratitude. She went back to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. She leaned against the counter and looked out the window at the misty night. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room. It wasn't just a thank you for the money. It was a thank you for the kindness. It was a thank you for reminding her that even in the hardest times, when the rain is coming down and the world feels cold, there are good people out there, people who listen, people who care. She finished her water, turned off the light, and headed to bed. She knew tomorrow would bring a new set of challenges. Life was never simple. But tonight, she had won. Tonight, her brother was an artist, and the tuition was paid. She fell asleep almost instantly, a deep, dreamless sleep. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't dream about bills or empty bank accounts. She dreamed about a warm restaurant, a quiet conversation, and a man in a dark jacket who reminded her that hope was never truly lost.
The next morning came too quickly. The gray light of dawn was just starting to seep through the thin curtains of Jenny's bedroom when her alarm went off. She slapped the snooze button, groaning as the events of the previous night came rushing back to her in a blurry, chaotic wave. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. For a glorious 10 seconds, she didn't remember anything. She was just a tired waitress who wanted to go back to sleep. Then, the memory hit her like a physical weight. The rain, the restaurant, the quiet conversation, the money. Jenny threw the covers off and practically ran to the kitchen, her bare feet slapping against the cold linoleum. She needed to see it. She needed to prove to herself that it hadn't been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. The kitchen was empty. The morning sun was streaming through the window, illuminating the small wooden table. And there it was. The stack of $100 bills was still sitting on top of the acceptance letter, looking entirely out of place in their shabby little kitchen. The handwritten note rested on top of the money. She picked up the note, reading the words again. "Don't let the fire go out." It was real. Every single dollar of it was real. She let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 6 months. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from the sheer magnitude of the relief. She sank into a chair and just stared at the money. It was a solution to a problem that had been crushing her for weeks. It was a lifeline. But as the adrenaline faded, a new feeling crept in. It was a strange, uneasy sensation in the pit of her stomach. Guilt. She looked at the money, and instead of seeing salvation, she started to see a debt she could never repay. Keanu Reeves didn't know her. He didn't know Tommy. He was just a man trying to eat dinner in peace, and she had unloaded her burdens on him. She had basically complained about her life to a stranger. Had she manipulated him? Had she unknowingly used her sob story to get a handout? The thoughts spiraled in her head. She was a hard worker. She took pride in paying her own way. Taking charity, even from a movie star, felt like admitting defeat. It felt like she wasn't enough on her own. She heard a shuffling sound from the living room. Tommy was waking up. Panic flared in her chest. She quickly scooped up the money and the note, shoving them into her apron pocket. She couldn't let him see it yet,
not like this. She didn't know how to explain it. She didn't know how to tell him that a stranger had paid for his future because his sister couldn't. "Morning," Tommy mumbled, stumbling into the kitchen. He looked younger than 17 in his oversized t-shirt, his hair sticking up in every direction. He rubbed his eyes and went straight for the cereal box. "Hey, Jenny," said Jenny, her voice sounding strained. She turned away, busying herself with the coffee maker. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," Tommy said, pouring the cereal. He didn't look at the table where the money had been. He didn't know anything was different. "Are you coming home early tonight, or is it another double?" Jenny gripped the counter. "Another double. Sorry, Tommy." "It's fine," he said, but his voice lacked its usual energy. He crunched his cereal in silence for a minute. "Hey, Jenny." "Yeah?" "I was thinking," not looking at her, "maybe I should get a job, like a real part-time job, bagging groceries or something. I can help out with the bills. I can maybe save up for the program next year." Jenny froze, her heart squeezed painfully in her chest. He was giving up. He was resigning himself to the fact that he couldn't go this year. He was trying to be the man of the house because he thought she couldn't do it. She turned around and looked at him. He looked so earnest, so willing to sacrifice his own dream to help her. The guilt in her stomach twisted into something sharper. She had the money in her pocket. She could fix this right now. She could pull it out, slap it on the table, and scream, "We made it!" But she couldn't. The fear of his reaction stopped her. Tommy was proud. He was just like their father. If she told him a movie star had given them $3,000, he might refuse it. He might say it was charity. He might feel like he owed something he couldn't give. "I don't want you getting a job yet, Tommy," she said, her voice firm. "Focus on your art. That's your job." "Jenny, be real," he said, a flash of frustration crossing his face. "The deposit is due Friday. We don't have it. I'm not an idiot. I know how hard you're working. I can't just sit here and draw while you're killing yourself." "You're not killing yourself," she argued weakly. "I see you, Jenny," he said, looking up at her. His eyes were sad. "I see you not eating dinner so I can have seconds. I'm not a kid anymore." Jenny felt tears pricking her eyes. She turned away quickly, pretending to wash a dish that was already clean. "Just trust me, okay? I'm working on it. We might have a surprise. Just trust me." Tommy sighed, the sound heavy and skeptical. "Okay, sure, a surprise." He finished his cereal and put the bowl in the sink. "I'm going to school." "Have a good day," she called out. "You too," he mumbled, grabbing his backpack and heading out the door. When the door clicked shut, the silence rushed back in. Jenny leaned against the sink, letting out a ragged breath. That was close, too close. She pulled the wad of cash out of her pocket. It felt heavy, heavy with responsibility and expectation. She needed to get to the bank. She needed to secure this money before it magically disappeared, before reality realized it had made a mistake and took it back. She grabbed her coat and headed out to her car. The drive to the bank was a blur. She kept checking her rearview mirror, half expecting someone to pull her over and accuse her of theft. It was a ridiculous thought, but the anxiety was real. She walked into the bank, clutching the money tight in her pocket. She approached a teller, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind thick glasses. "Can I help you?" the teller asked. "I need to deposit this," Jenny said, placing the stack of bills on the counter. Her hand trembled slightly. The teller began to count the money with quick, efficient fingers. The machine whirred, sorting the bills. Jenny watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Is this a withdrawal from another account?" the teller asked, looking at the large sum. "No," Jenny said. "It's a gift from a friend." The teller raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. She finished the count. $3,400, she announced. Jenny blinked. 400? "Yes, ma'am. There are 4 extra hundreds in the stack." Jenny stared at the money. Keanu hadn't just given her the tuition. He had given her extra, for supplies, for groceries, for the little things that add up. The thoughtfulness of it made her eyes burn again. "Deposit it all," Jenny said, "into my checking account." She watched the screen as the numbers changed. For the first time in years, her account wasn't hovering near zero. It had a buffer. It had a future. She left the bank, clutching the receipt in her hand. She walked out into the bright morning sun. The world looked different. The air smelled sweeter. But she still had that knot of anxiety in her chest. She had secured the money, but she hadn't secured her brother's pride. She got in her car and sat there for a long moment. She looked at the bank receipt. Then she looked at the passenger seat where the handwritten note lay. She picked up the note. "I've left something in the folder for the art." He had specified it wasn't for the bills, it wasn't for the rent, it was specifically for the art. He had validated Tommy's dream. He had put a price tag on it that said, "This is worth investing in." Jenny realized then that she couldn't just hand Tommy the money. She had to frame it the right way. She had to make sure he understood that this wasn't charity. This was an investment in his talent. Someone believed in him enough to put down cold, hard cash. She started the engine. She had a plan. She wouldn't tell him tonight. She would wait until the morning of the deadline. She would present it to him as a scholarship or a grant. She would leave out the part about the movie star for now. Maybe one day she would tell the truth, that Keanu Reeves bought his first semester, but not now. Now he just needed to focus on his work. As she drove toward the restaurant to start her shift, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The silence and fear phase was ending. The money was in the bank. The path was clear. Or at least she thought it was clear. She didn't know yet that the story wasn't over. She didn't know that the note she found was just the first chapter of a much bigger change coming their way. She drove on, humming along to the radio, unaware that a small, unmarked envelope was already waiting for her at the restaurant's front desk, placed there by a courier just minutes before.
The morning of the deadline arrived with a strange, still quiet. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets clean and glistening under the pale California sun. Jenny stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee she hadn't taken a sip of. Today was the day. By 5 o'clock, the deposit for the art program had to be paid, or the spot would go to the next student on the list. She heard Tommy before she saw him. His footsteps were heavy on the stairs, a slow, dragging sound. When he walked into the kitchen, he didn't look like a teenager about to start his day. He looked like an old man carrying the weight of the world. He didn't even glance at the coffee pot. He just slumped into a chair and stared at the wooden table. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice flat. "Hey," Jenny said, trying to sound cheerful. "Big day." Tommy let out a long, ragged sigh. "Yeah, the day I officially don't go to art school." He reached into his backpack and pulled out the crumpled acceptance letter. He smoothed it out on the table one last time, looking at the logo of the institute with a look of pure heartbreak. "I called them yesterday while you were at work," he said softly. "I told them I might not make the deposit. They said they can't hold the spot any longer." Jenny felt a jolt of panic. "You called them?" "I didn't want to be the kid who just ghosts them," Tommy said, his jaw tightening. "I wanted to be professional. I wanted them to know I appreciated the offer, even if we can't afford it." He looked up at Jenny, and the defeat in his eyes was crushing. "It's okay, Jenny, really. I'll get a job. I'll apply again next year. We'll make it work." Jenny looked at her brother. He was trying to be strong for her, just like she had been trying to be strong for him. They were two people drowning in silence, trying to pretend they knew how to swim. But the truth was, she didn't want him to apply next year. She wanted him to start living his life now. She wanted him to have this win. She took a deep breath. It was time. "Tommy," she said, "put the letter away." "I'm just looking at it one last." "Put it away," she said, her voice firmer this time. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded bank receipt from yesterday. She also pulled out the handwritten note, the one she had found in the bill folder 2 nights ago. She placed them both on the table, sliding in across the wood until they rested under his nose. Tommy frowned. "What is this? A bank statement?"
He picked it up, his eyes scanning the numbers. He stopped breathing. His eyes widened. He looked at the balance, then at Jenny, then back at the paper. Jenny? What is this? Where did this come from? It's for the deposit, she said simply. But how? Tommy looked terrified now. Did you take out a loan? Jenny, please tell me you didn't go to a loan shark. We can't pay that back with interest. It's not a loan, she said. She tapped her finger on the handwritten note. Read this. Tommy picked up the piece of paper. She watched his eyes move over the messy, hurried handwriting. She watched his lips move slightly as he read the words aloud in a whisper. I saw the look in your eyes. I know that weight. Don't let the fire go out. I've left something in the folder. For the art. Tommy looked up, confusion etched all over his face. I don't understand. Who wrote this? Who is this from? Jenny sat down opposite him. 2 nights ago, the rainstorm. A man came into the restaurant. He was alone. We started talking. I told him about you. I told him he was an artist and that we were struggling. Who was it? Tommy asked, his voice trembling. It was Keanu Reeves, Jenny said. The name hung in the air, sounding surreal even to her own ears. Tommy stared at her. He blinked 3 times. Keanu? Like the actor? The Matrix guy? Yes, he was having dinner. He listened to me, Tommy, really listened. And when he left that note and the money. Tommy shook his head, backing away from the table as if the money was burning him. No way. Jenny, that's crazy. Why would he do that? He doesn't know me. This doesn't make sense. I don't know why, Jenny admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. Maybe because he knows what it's like to lose things. Maybe because he believes in art. Maybe he just wanted to do something good. But it's real, Tommy. The money is in the bank. It's cleared. It's yours. Tommy looked at the money, then at the note, then at his sister. We can't take this. It's too much. It's charity. I can't let a stranger pay for my life. It's not charity, Jenny said fiercely. She reached across the table and grabbed his hand. It's a gift. It's a hand up. You know what he wrote in the note? Don't let the fire go out. He saw your fire, Tommy. He saw it through me. If you don't take this, if you don't go to this program, you're not just letting yourself down. You're letting down the person who believed in you enough to give you this chance. Tommy's face crumbled. The tough exterior he had been building up cracked and fell away. He looked like a scared kid again. I'm scared. What if I'm not good enough? What if I waste his money? Jenny squeezed his hand tight. You are good enough. You're going to work harder than anyone else there. You're going to show him he was right. The kitchen was silent for a long time. The sun moved across the floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Tommy looked at the acceptance letter. He looked at the bank receipt. He looked at the note from a stranger. Slowly he reached out and picked up the note. He read it again. This time his hand wasn't shaking. He folded it carefully and put it in his wallet. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Okay, I'll go. Jenny let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a lifetime. Really? Yeah, Tommy said, a small, real smile finally touching his lips. Yeah, I'll go. 2 months later, the air was warm and smelled of dry leaves and possibility. The art program was in full swing, and Tommy was thriving. He called Jenny every night to tell her about the new techniques he was yarning, the charcoal sketches he was working on, the friends he was making. He sounded different, lighter, happier. The weight was gone from his voice. It was a Saturday afternoon when the mail came. Jenny was sitting on the front porch, enjoying a rare day off. The mailman handed her a stack of bills and one large, thick envelope that didn't look like a bill at all. It was a manila envelope, stiff and heavy. There was no return address, just her name written in that same familiar, messy handwriting she had seen once before. Her heart skipped a beat. She tore open the envelope. Inside there was no money this time. Inside was a large framed photograph. It was a black and white picture of a motorcycle on an empty highway. It was moody, atmospheric, and beautiful. It looked like a professional print. But it was the note attached to the back that made her knees weak. She pulled the small index card off the tape. It was short, just 2 sentences. I heard the boy is doing well. Tell him to keep writing. K. Jenny sat down on the porch steps, holding the frame in her hands. She laughed, a wet, happy sound that came from deep in her belly. He hadn't just helped them once. He was still cooked there, thinking about them. He was following the story. She realized then that it wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about the tuition. It was about connection. In a city of millions of people, in a world that can feel cold and indifferent, two strangers had connected over a meal and a shared understanding of pain and hope. Keanu Reeves had come for dinner, and he had left with a check. But he had left them with something far more valuable. He had given them the belief that miracles could happen, even on a rainy Tuesday night. She stood up and walked inside to call Tommy. She couldn't wait to tell him. The fire was burning bright, and it wasn't going out ever again.